Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In June 2006, as Germany celebrated hosting the FIFA World Cup, 21-year-old nursing student Frauke Liebs vanished after watching a match at a local pub in Paderborn. What followed was a week of psychological torture for her family, cryptic text messages, and one haunting phone call from Frauke herself, speaking in an unnaturally formal tone. Was she trying to signal for help? When her body was discovered months later in the Teutoburg forest, investigators were left with more questions than answers. Tonight, we dive into one of Germany's most perplexing modern mysteries. Let's begin. On a warm summer evening in June 2006, the streets of Paderborn, Germany, were alive with excitement. The FIFA World Cup was being hosted in Germany that year, and the entire nation was caught up in football fever. 21-year-old Frauke Liebs, a nursing student at the St. Vincent's Hospital, decided to join the festivities by watching the evening's match at the Paderschenker pub with her friend Katharina. The night of June 20th started like any other. Frauke, described by those who knew her as responsible, kind-hearted, and dedicated to her studies, had finished her shift at the hospital and changed into casual clothes. She wore jeans, a black top, and carried her characteristic brown shoulder bag. The pub was crowded with football fans, and the atmosphere was jubilant as Germany continued its successful run in the tournament. Around 11 p.m., after the match had ended, Frauke and Katharina parted ways. Katharina would later recall that Frauke seemed completely normal, making plans for the following days and discussing their upcoming work schedules. Frauke sent a text message to her roommate at 11:15 p.m. saying she would be home soon. This would be the last normal communication anyone would have with her. Frauke's apartment was just a short walk from the pub, barely 2 kilometers away. She should have arrived home within 30 minutes. But when her roommate woke up the next morning, Frauke's bed hadn't been slept in. Her work clothes from the previous day were still neatly folded in her room, exactly as she had left them. Initially, there wasn't immediate cause for alarm. Frauke was an adult, and while it was unusual for her not to come home, her friends thought perhaps she had stayed with someone else. However, when she failed to show up for her shift at the hospital later that day, concern began to grow. Frauke was known for her reliability and had never missed work without notice. The first strange development came that evening when Frauke's mobile phone was used to send a text message to her roommate. The message was brief and oddly formal, unlike Frauke's usual texting style. It simply stated that she would return home soon. When questioned about where she was, the responses became increasingly vague and uncharacteristic. Over the next several days, Frauke's phone would be used to send more messages to family and friends. Each message seemed designed to prevent immediate police involvement, suggesting she was okay but unable to come home yet. The messages were short, cryptic, and lacked the emotional content one would expect from someone voluntarily away from home. The most significant contact came on June 24th, 4 days after her disappearance, when Frauke managed to make a phone call to her sister. The call lasted only a few minutes, and according to her sister, Frauke sounded strange, distant, and spoke in an unusually formal manner. When asked directly if she was being held against her will, Frauke responded with a clear yes. However, when immediately asked again, she changed her answer to no. This would be the last time anyone would hear her voice. The investigation revealed that Frauke's phone had been connecting to different cell towers across the Paderborn region during these communications. This suggested she was being moved around the area, but the pattern seemed random and provided no clear leads. The last signal from her phone was recorded on June 27th, 1 week after her disappearance. The police investigation faced numerous challenges from the start. The delay in reporting her disappearance, caused by the misleading messages, meant that crucial early hours were lost. The World Cup meant that Paderborn had been full of visitors and temporary residents, making it difficult to track down potential witnesses. Additionally, the pub's security cameras had not been functioning properly that night, leaving a crucial gap in the timeline. Investigators began to piece together Frauke's last known movements. After leaving the pub, she was captured on CCTV at a bus stop near the Paderschenke, though she never boarded a bus. This was the last confirmed sighting of her. Several witnesses came forward claiming to have seen someone matching her description walking along Hochstiftstrasse, a route she might have taken home, but these sightings couldn't be definitively confirmed. The nature of the text messages and the phone call strongly suggested that Frauke was being held captive during this period. The formal language, the inconsistent responses, and the apparent movement around the region all pointed to someone controlling her movements and communications. But who had taken her, and why? The investigation took a dark turn when forensic analysis of the text messages revealed disturbing patterns. Language experts noted that while the messages came from Frauke's phone, the writing style showed signs of being composed under duress. The formal German language used in the texts contrasted sharply with Frauke's usual casual messaging style, and there were subtle grammatical choices that suggested someone else might have been dictating the messages to her. The phone call to Frauke's sister became a crucial piece of evidence. Criminal psychologists analyzing the recording noted that Frauke's voice displayed signs of what they termed captive behavior, a phenomenon where victims attempt to communicate their situation while under the watch of their captors. Her contradictory responses to the question about being held against her will were particularly telling. Experts suggested this might have been her attempt to signal for help without alerting her captor. The investigation expanded to include a thorough analysis of Frauke's personal life. Detectives interviewed her colleagues at St. Vincent's Hospital, fellow nursing students, and regular customers at the Paderschenke pub. They discovered that in the weeks before her disappearance, Frauke hadn't reported any strange encounters or expressed concern about being followed. Her daily routine had been consistent: classes, hospital shifts, and occasional evenings out with friends. By August 2006, with no new leads emerging, the police decided to take an unprecedented step. They released detailed cellular data showing the approximate locations where Frauke's phone had connected to various towers during the week after her disappearance. The pattern was peculiar. The phone had pinged towers in Paderborn, Nieheim, and several locations in between. This suggested whoever had Frauke was familiar with the region's geography and had access to transportation. The case took another significant turn when investigators received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in the Teutoburg forest. The vast woodland area, spanning hundreds of square kilometers, had already been partially searched in the weeks following Frauke's disappearance. However, this new information was specific enough to warrant another search. On October 4, 2006, over 3 months after Frauke vanished, a hunter made a grim discovery in a remote area of the forest near Lichtenau. Hidden among the dense vegetation were human remains. DNA testing would later confirm what Frauke's family had feared most. They had found Frauke Liebs. The location where Frauke's body was found provided both answers and new questions. The site was approximately 27 kilometers from where she was last seen, in an area that would have been difficult to access without local knowledge. The remote location suggested the perpetrator was familiar with the Teutoburg forest and its many secluded areas. Moreover, the spot was not visible from any main roads or hiking trails, indicating careful selection of the disposal site. Forensic analysis of the scene and Frauke's remains presented investigators with a complex puzzle. Due to the time that had elapsed and environmental exposure, many potential pieces of evidence had been lost. However, what they did find suggested that Frauke had been held captive for some time before her death. Trace evidence indicated she had been kept in an indoor location, possibly an industrial or agricultural building. The investigation team began mapping potential locations where Frauke might have been held during the week she was still alive. Using the cell tower data and forensic evidence, they identified several areas of interest. These included abandoned farm buildings, vacant industrial properties, and remote residences that fell within the pattern of phone signals. One particularly interesting lead emerged when investigators discovered that several of the cell tower locations corresponded with routes used by long-haul truck drivers. This led to a theory that her captor might have been connected to the transportation industry, explaining both the ability to move around the region and the knowledge of remote locations. However, despite checking thousands of truck routes and driver logs from that period, no definitive connection could be established. The police also focused on the psychological profile of the perpetrator. The careful selection of the disposal site, the week-long period of captivity, and the controlled communication through Frauke's phone all pointed to someone who was methodical and familiar with the area. Criminal psychologists suggested the perpetrator likely had a history of predatory behavior and might have committed similar crimes before. This theory led investigators to review unsolved cases from the surrounding regions, looking for patterns or similarities. While several cases shared some characteristics with Frauke's abduction, none provided the breakthrough they needed. The unique aspects of her case, particularly the week of controlled communication, made it stand out from other missing persons cases in the area. As the investigation continued, detectives faced mounting pressure from both the public and Frauke's family. The case had captured national attention, partly due to its timing during the World Cup, and partly due to the haunting nature of those final communications. The fact that someone had held Frauke captive while forcing her to send messages to loved ones struck a particularly chilling chord with the public. The investigation's focus shifted to understanding the final week of Frauke's life, particularly the psychological torment she and her family had endured through those controlled communications. Criminal psychologists who studied the case suggested that the perpetrator likely derived satisfaction not just from holding Frauke captive, but from manipulating her loved ones through the messages and phone call. The forensic analysis of Frauke's remains, though limited by decomposition, provided some crucial insights. There were indications that she had been kept in a location with concrete or stone flooring, based on particular abrasions and trace evidence. This aligned with the industrial or agricultural building theory that investigators had developed. Additionally, fibers found on what remained of her clothing suggested she had been held in a location where vehicle maintenance or mechanical work was performed. In 2007, investigators made a concentrated effort to reach potential witnesses who might have been hesitant to come forward initially. They were particularly interested in anyone who had been in the vicinity of the Paderborn pub on the night of June 20, 2006. This led to several new statements, including one from a woman who recalled seeing a light-colored van parked unusually close to the bus stop where Frauke was last captured on CCTV. While this information was interesting, the significant time lag meant it couldn't be properly verified. The case also drew attention from international law enforcement agencies, particularly those specializing in abduction cases involving prolonged captivity. The unusual pattern of controlled communication followed by murder was studied by behavioral analysts from several countries. Their collective analysis suggested that the perpetrator likely had a need for control and dominance, but also possessed the social awareness to maintain a normal public persona. One of the most troubling aspects of the case was the possibility that the perpetrator had struck before or might strike again. Investigators created a database of similar cases across Germany and neighboring countries, focusing on abductions where victims were held for short periods before being murdered. While several cases shared some characteristics, none matched the specific pattern of Frauke's abduction closely enough to definitively link them. The location where Frauke's body was discovered continued to yield clues years after her death. Periodic re-examinations of the area revealed that the site had likely been visited multiple times by the perpetrator, suggesting a possible emotional connection to the location. This behavior is sometimes seen in offenders who return to locations associated with their crimes, either out of compulsion or to relive the experience. In 2008, investigators employed new technology to analyze the cell tower data from Frauke's phone. Advanced mapping software created a more detailed picture of the phone's movement pattern during that final week. This analysis revealed something interesting. The phone had never strayed more than 40 kilometers from Paderborn, and the movement pattern suggested someone who was going about regular daily activities while holding Frauke captive. This realization led investigators to theorize that the perpetrator likely maintained their normal routine during the period of Frauke's captivity, possibly even going to work or interacting with family and friends while keeping her hidden. This pointed to someone with access to a secure private location and the ability to compartmentalize their life effectively. The case has remained active in the years since Frauke's death, with periodic reviews and new investigative techniques being applied as they become available. In 2016, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, investigators used advanced DNA testing methods to re-examine evidence from the scene where her body was found. While this yielded some new genetic information, no matches were found in any criminal databases. The Frauke Liebs case has become a significant part of German criminal history, studied by law enforcement agencies and criminologists for its unique characteristics. The combination of a seemingly random abduction, controlled communication with family, and the ultimate murder of the victim presents a pattern that experts continue to analyze. For Frauke's family, the lack of closure has been particularly difficult to bear. The knowledge that their loved one was alive and conscious of her situation for at least a week after her abduction, trying to communicate through carefully controlled messages and that final phone call, adds an extra layer of tragedy to their loss. Her sister, who received that last phone call, has spoken publicly about the guilt she feels for not being able to help Frauke, despite having the chance to speak with her. The case has also led to changes in how German law enforcement handles missing persons cases, particularly those involving suspicious communications from the victim. The delayed response to Frauke's disappearance, caused by the messages suggesting she was safe, prompted a review of protocols. Now, unusual or uncharacteristic messages from missing persons are treated with much more suspicion from the outset. As of today, the case remains unsolved, but not forgotten. Regular reviews of the evidence continue, and investigators maintain hope that advances in forensic science or a confession might eventually bring closure to this haunting case. The files remain open in Paderborn, and police still receive occasional tips, each of which is thoroughly investigated. Frauke Liebs' story serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly and unexpectedly life can change. One moment she was enjoying a football match with friends, caught up in the excitement of her country hosting the World Cup. The next, she became the victim of a crime that continues to baffle investigators and haunt her community. Her case stands as one of Germany's most perplexing modern mysteries, a tragic reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life.